Hi, my name is Boris Havel, and today I'm going to talk about biblical and modern Hebrew perspectives on Palestinian name and identity. An introduction. Now, the concept of Palestine and Palestinians is today causing much attention, debate, and confusion. The question is it political? Is it ethnic community? Is it rooted in history? Is it rooted in ancient history? How do they relate also to territory to which they compete with the modern Jewish state, the state of Israel, and the Jewish people? In this short presentation, I will focus on Hebrew etymology and the modern Hebrew use of the name, but we will also see how it developed through the history. Now, in the beginning, you may ask why Israeli and Hebrew understanding of Palestinian identity is relevant at all. Well, it is very relevant because understanding of modern Palestinian identity is we may say entirely related to Bible, to ancient Hebrew texts, and even to Jewish historical processes, primarily 2nd century AD. Now, the toponym Philistia, Pleshet, as you see now on screen on your first slide, and the ethnonym Plishtim in Hebrew, Philistines, they have become relevant in modern political thought in the form of Palestine and Palestinians. And they were used and to a degree confused from the very beginning of the even Zionist movement, when primarily Jews used it. When the name Palestine was used in Zionist texts in English language and other European languages, except in Hebrew. There was always a name in Hebrew, Eretz Israel, and the name Palestine was, of course, not there. But they had to somehow include it in the world in which Zionist movement was being created. I'm going to talk about it in a few minutes. Now, from the beginning, Palestine was not at all a political concept, but it was a geographical term, geographical. And of course, you should know that there have never existed Palestinian people apart from Plishtim, but Palestinian people did not exist in history until rather recently, 1960s approximately. And what we want to know to begin with is how did this geographical name, Pleshet, how did it appear? Now, Palestinian name comes from the biblical world, biblical Plishtim, and even the name Plishtim, Philistines, appears in the Bible more than 280 times in the Hebrew Bible, of course. And Plishtim, they were an ancient people who captured Canaan, conquered parts of it, approximately in the same time when Israelite tribes crossed Jordan and captured the areas under Joshua. Now, they're mentioned also in other sources, for example, in Egyptian sources, because Plishtim tried to capture Egyptian lands too. And they are mentioned in those sources and one of the people of the sea. And it is assumed generally that they came from Aegean islands, but not much about their origin is known. Etymology, however, of the Hebrew name, Pleshet and Plishtim, points to intrusion, invasion, and conquest. That is, the root of the name for Philistines is the same as Hebrew word for conquest. And that's why we may assume that Plishtim did not name themselves, but that the name came from other sources. Perhaps they were named by the Hebrew speakers of the time. And how do we have an interesting affirmation of this hypothesis, because when Septuagint was translated, that is Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, in Septuagint, in the Greek, the Philistines were mostly translated as foreigners. This is what you see in slide number 2. Now, these Plishtim, as recorded in the Bible, were the greatest enemies of Israel. They killed King of Israel, and they also captured the Ark of the Covenant, and thus they were the only recorded enemy that captured the most holy item of the Israelites before they built the temple. Now, they also faded from history when, around the time of the Babylonian conquest, that is 6th century BC, when you read the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, those who came to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple after the Babylonian exile was coming to an end, in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, they are not mentioned anymore. They're also not mentioned in other sources, in deuterocanonical books. Primarily, I'm thinking about the books of Maccabees. They're not mentioned in the Hasmonean period, 2nd century BC. And their disappearance is a great enigma, which was to a great degree solved only by modern archaeological discoveries. And modern archaeologists, they can tell you that we still do not know, we know more, but not everything about their appearance and disappearance. But what we know is where they lived. And we know a lot about their culture, their cults, their everyday lives, and so on. Because they're very rich archaeological sites in the areas where they lived. Of course, which is area of Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, and Ekron and Gath, a little bit more to the east. Now, the Greek name Palestine appeared first in the 5th century BC in Herodotus. This is what you see now on slide number 3. And it was later rarely mentioned in other Greek texts. For example, Aristotle mentioned Palestine once, and it's also mentioned by Jewish writers, for example, by Philo of Alexandria and by Josephus, just in a few places. And always it is with a lot of a meaning which is ambiguous and just vaguely corresponding to what is in Hebrew known as Eretz Israel, that is the land between Syria on the north, Egypt on the south, Arabia on the east, and the Mediterranean Sea on the west. And Palestine, please note, has never been mentioned in the Bible, not in the Old and not in the New Testament. Now, when the Romans crushed the Bar Kokhba rebellion, the second great Jewish rebellion, in the year 135 AD, Emperor Hadrian wanted to erase the name of Judea. He wanted to erase the identity of Jews. He killed a lot of them. He sent many of them to exile. That is when the great exile began. Well, today is known in Hebrew as Galut. And then he changed the name of Judea into Palestina. That is what you see on slide number 4. So that is how Palestina came to be. He also renamed Jerusalem into Aelia Capitolina, but that name faded away at least by the time of the Crusaders. It was only temporarily around. Today, very few even know it existed. But the name Palestine, it lingered on and lived and lives still today. Now, through centuries after Hadrian, it lost its political connotation, and it at some point appeared as the best toponym to call that piece of land. Again, in Hebrew called Eretz Israel, but how do you call it in any other name? Language, excuse me. So Palestinian identity grew among local Arab population only in time of Zionism. There has never been Palestinian identity in all these centuries when the name was invented. But when Zionism became a dominant political movement in Palestine, the local Arab population also started to relate to some degree to Palestinian identity, but also with the Jews. And what appeared in the Hebrew language is the question: how do you actually write the name Palestine? Should it relate to the biblical Hebrew text, or should it not? So this is what you see now in slide number 5. The first solution that the Zionists came to, which happened before 1948, is that they should use the letters Sin and Tav in the Hebrew name of Palestine, which reflected the name of Philistia as recorded in the biblical text. And so you can see it also on coins in the slide number 6. And so was this name used throughout the British Mandate period. But after 1948, when the Jewish state was established, the state of Israel, the use of the letters Samech and Tet instead became more reasonable, it seems. This is what you see now in the slide number 7. However, there was no really discussion within the Hebrew community in which way to write the name of Palestine. So if you are confused today about the Palestinian identity, maybe you should be comforted by knowing that even Israeli Jews, native speakers of Hebrew language, were quite confused about the way in which the name Palestine should be written. Now, please note that if you write anything, including the name Palestine, and please see the slide number 7 for a while again, if you use letters Samech and Tet, then you by default refer to something new. If you want to write new words such as statistica or student in modern Hebrew language, you would always use Samech and Tet, and you will never use Sin and Tav. And so using Samech and Tet in writing Palestinian and Palestine indicates a contemporary concept unrelated to ancient identities. But it was not before mid-1990s, only 30 years ago, that the Hebrew Academy of the Hebrew language, that is the main institution for norming the Hebrew language, modern Hebrew language, they adopted the second option and recommended it as standard. That is the option with Samech and Tet, from which you clearly see that it is a new identity, new phenomenon. It has nothing to do with antiquity and the biblical era. Now, that process of standardization has never been completed. If you Google today the name of Palestine and Palestinians in Hebrew, you can Google both ways, that which you see in slide number 7, and you will find results, even though in good and appreciated dictionaries such as Even Shoshan, you will only find it correctly written by Samech and Tet. So this, to a great degree, relates also to, it seems to me, a lot of Israeli Jewish thinking about who are the Palestinians. It seems that it's not, from this confusion on spelling, it seems to me that confusion in understanding is also visible and present. Now, let me tell you again, Palestinians, modern Palestinians, have no ethnic connection to biblical Plishtim, not at all. And it can be argued that the Palestinian nation was invented rather recently. That is what, in a famous statement, Golda Meir said, for example, in an interview that was later published in many books and publications. And just a few months ago, Israeli minister Bezalel Smotrich also said that there is no Palestinian nation. He says, I am Palestinian because my family for generations comes from Eretz Israel. But this is something that, it seems to me, is being questioned by very recent development in the Middle East. The development which is connected to signing of Abrahamic Accords. Now, pay attention to this. We know that Palestinians, who are the Arabs, they do not relate to Plishtim, and we know when the Arabs captured Palestine, that happened in the year 638 approximately. That's when Jerusalem fell to the Arabs. And we know when Arabs from Arabia settled these lands called Palestine between Syria and Egypt. But today, if you follow Israeli news, and I was just recently reading a great autobiography by Benjamin Netanyahu called Bibi, published just 2 years ago, what you may notice is that Israelis do not have an issue with the concept of Palestinian nation. And that is something that may surprise you, because when they refer to the main political and military foe, they do accept their own way that they identify themselves. That is, they do not try to refute it by pointing to history, but they just accept it. And the reason why, it seems to me, is as Israel comes, modern Israel, what's happening just these days, even though there is a war, as Israel comes closer to Arab nations around, especially after signing the Abrahamic Accords, Israel wisely also sees the advantage in detaching the Palestinians from the Arab corpus. If they are seen as a separate body, then Israel can be at war with Palestinians, but at the same time be signing peace, negotiate, and cooperate with wider Arab communities. However, this is a wider topic for another lecture. Thank you for your attention.